Sign this, Elias. It's a formality. It just officially absolves me of all liability for the mess your father left." My uncle Marcus spoke those words with a smug smile, sliding a thick legal folder across the mahogany desk. He had no idea that those 12 words would be the trigger for his complete and utter destruction. 6 months after that meeting, Marcus was arrested by federal agents on the pier of what used to be our family's shipyard. I was standing across the street, watching the whole thing unfold, and all I could do was smile. My name is Elias Thorne. I'm 38 years old, and I used to believe that blood meant loyalty. I learned the hard way that, sometimes, blood only means opportunity for the greedy. This is the story of how my uncle stole $70 million of my family's legacy, and how I used one forgotten contract clause to pay him back. Thorne Marine wasn't just a business, it was a legend in our town. For a century we had built the finest custom ships and yachts on the East Coast. It was founded by my great-grandfather in 1923, built on the principle of craftsmanship and integrity. My father, Richard Thorne, embodied that principle perfectly. He was a man of calloused hands and a sharp mind. He taught me everything. He taught me that a contract is only as good as the man signing it, and that trust, once earned, should never be broken. When I was a boy, I spent every summer at the shipyard, breathing in the smell of salt and freshly cut cedar. The rhythm of the hammering and the distant sound of gulls was the soundtrack to my childhood. I was meant to inherit the company. I was ready, prepared to take the helm of a third-generation institution. I went to law school specifically to learn corporate and maritime law, all to protect Thorne Marine. I was the designated successor, trained for 20 years for that single purpose. My life was charted. My uncle Marcus, however, was a different story entirely. He was my father's younger brother, but they were nothing alike in spirit or ambition. My father was grounded, preferring the smell of bilge water to cologne. Marcus was flashy, loud, and loved to wear bespoke suits that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He worked in high-end finance, always chasing the next quick dollar, the next big merger. He viewed our shipyard as sleepy and old-fashioned, a dusty inheritance my father was foolishly clinging to. He always used to say, "Why build one ship for $2 million when you can flip 100 companies for $50 million? There was always a subtle tension between them, the artisan versus the financier. When my father passed away unexpectedly from a massive heart attack 3 years ago, everything changed. The will was clear. Marcus was appointed interim CEO to manage operations until I completed my specialization. "You need time to grieve, Elias," he'd told me with a hand on my shoulder. "I'll keep the seat warm for you." That gesture felt genuinely warm at the time. I was adrift in grief, and Marcus seemed like a sturdy pillar of support. He played the part of the grieving, responsible brother perfectly. He was a master of performance, I realize now. For the first year, I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? He was family. He was the man who taught me how to fish as a kid, the one who paid for my first semester of college. I was so consumed by my grief, by the silence of the house without my father's laugh, that I barely glanced at the quarterly reports. Marcus always had an excuse, delivered with practiced sincerity: market slump. "Elias, the big military contract fell through. We need to tighten our belts and liquidate some non-core assets." The reports he sent me were opaque, dense with intentionally confusing financial jargon and footnotes. His personal life, however, became instantly transparent. He started driving a new, custom, ordered Porsche 911 Targa. He moved into a penthouse apartment overlooking the harbor. He began taking unexplained, week-long trips to Geneva and the Cayman Islands, always chalked up to potential foreign investment. These were the first small, almost imperceptible cracks in the foundation of my trust. Marcus wasn't tightening belts. He was actively living like a king, funding his new life with company assets. I pushed the doubts away. Family is family, I told myself. He's just a better businessman. More aggressive than my father and I were. He had a flair for the dramatic, a salesman's touch my dad lacked. That's the only difference. Then the phone calls started, not from Marcus, but from old, loyal clients my father had worked with for decades. They were subtle questions, veiled inquiries that carried genuine concern. "Elias, did you know that Marcus is selling off the last of the mahogany stock? That wood is irreplaceable. We heard the North Pier lot is going up for auction next month. Is that true?" "That's where we dock the Triton." I confronted Marcus about the pier sale. He sighed deeply, looking exasperated, treating me like the naive child he always thought I was. "Elias, the North Pier is dead weight. It hasn't been used for major industrial work in 30 years. We're trimming the fat to survive this recession. Same as every other shipyard. He convinced me. He used my own legal knowledge against me, citing obscure tax benefits and property depreciation schedules. He leveraged his position of family trust to blind me with complexity and urgency. I signed off on the sale of the North Pier. It was a $500,000 deal, a fraction of its true value. I signed it because I trusted him to save the rest of the company for me. I signed it because he was my uncle, my father's brother. That signature was the moment he knew he had me exactly where he wanted me, legally complicit and emotionally defeated. The meeting where he slid the folder across the desk happened 4 months after the North Pier sale. It was a sunny Tuesday, but the air in his high-rise office felt cold, sterile, and thin. The document was a blanket release of liability, formally dissolving the Thorne Marine Transitional Oversight Committee. "We're done here, Elias," Marcus announced, leaning back in his Italian leather chair, radiating finality. "The company's liabilities are too great. The debt is astronomical. We tried everything. You get the corporate name and the outstanding debt. The board voted to dissolve it last week. Just sign this so we can close the books and move on." His sheer, indifferent callousness was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole my breath. The company was my father's life. It was everything. I picked up the pen. My hand was trembling, not from sadness, but from a sudden, blinding clarity of pure, focused rage. I looked at the document. It was 6 pages long, dense, and designed entirely to discourage careful reading. It was a legal obfuscation tool. As a contracts lawyer, I knew better than to be discouraged. I took a slow, deep breath, the metallic taste of betrayal sharp in my mouth, and started reading every single line. The boilerplate details didn't matter. What mattered was the sudden, desperate urgency in Marcus's eyes when I paused on page 4, near a clause detailing asset distribution. He looked impatient, almost panicked, for one brief, revealing second. The mask slipped. He tried to rush me. "Elias, it's just boilerplate. Nothing to worry about. Standard stuff for a voluntary dissolution." I realized then he wasn't rushing me because he was busy. He was rushing me because he was absolutely terrified of what I might find. He needed my signature to bury a monumental secret. Something big enough to put him away for years. I folded the papers with deliberate slowness, placed them back on the desk, and smiled. It was a cool, terrifying smile that started in my mind and didn't reach my eyes. "You're right, Uncle Marcus. It's just boilerplate. But my father always taught me to sleep on boilerplate. I'll review it thoroughly and return it signed tomorrow." The panic in his eyes intensified for a flicker. Then he masked it with a forced, high-pitched laugh that sounded brittle. "Fine, whatever you need, Elias. Just don't drag your feet. This debt is accumulating interest. We need this done." I stood up, shook his hand. The touch felt slimy and warm, and walked out. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, deliberately, savoring the silence. The moment I stepped onto the street, the mask dropped entirely. The initial shock and rage were gone, replaced by a crystalline, arctic calm. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't call him a bastard or make any immediate, satisfying move. I decided right there and then that my response would be strategic, surgical, and absolutely final, not emotional. He wanted to play a high-stakes game of corporate fraud. I was going to play better. I spent the next 3 months living 2 parallel lives, a high-wire act of deception. In the first life, I was the broken hair. I sent Marcus apologetic emails about needing time to grieve the loss of the company and dealing with the overwhelming debt. I dragged my feet on signing the release, citing minor technicalities. In the second life, I was Elias Thorne, corporate lawyer, forensic auditor, and relentless hunter. I used my old firm connections in a cloud-based forensic analysis suite. I started with the North Pier land sale. The buyer was listed as Harborview Development. Standard. But I dug deeper, peeling back the layers of ownership through their SEC filings and global registries. It wasn't just a local development firm. It was a shell for a massive international real estate investment trust. The price they paid was 6 times the amount Marcus reported to the board and filed with the city. Where did the $60 million difference go? I pulled every bank record, every transfer, every memo, and every digital communication related to Thorne Marine since the day my father died. It was a massive, encrypted digital archive I downloaded onto an external drive. My legal mind and training saw the patterns immediately. Marcus wasn't trimming fat. He was surgically extracting the organs of the company. He had sold all the specialized, custom-built machinery to foreign buyers, undervalued by exactly 50%, skimming the remainder through intermediary invoices. Crucially, he had transferred all of the company's proprietary shipbuilding patents, the true 50 million core value, to a single offshore holding company. That holding company was registered in the notoriously opaque Cayman Islands, Marlin Holdings, Ltd., and the sole signatory, the sole owner, the man receiving all those millions, Marcus Thorne. The betrayal was total, absolute, and chillingly calculated. He didn't just let the company die. He murdered it, stole its soul, and tried to hand me the empty, debt-ridden corpse. But the real money, the 70 million in total assets he had liquidated and hidden, was sitting in accounts controlled by Marlin Holdings. I had the smoking gun evidence, organized and labeled. Now I needed the trap, a perfectly legal, morally devastating trap that would spring shut on all fronts simultaneously. The key to my plan was something Marcus, the finance man, had completely forgotten: my father's deep, almost sacred respect for the old ways and the law. While Marcus was busy liquidating assets and focusing on the financial balance sheets, he missed one critical detail in the original 1923 deed for the shipyard land. It wasn't just a deed of sale, it contained a federal maritime covenant. This covenant, a relic of post-World War I industrial protection laws, stipulated that the land, because of its unique harbor location and critical infrastructure, must always be used for maritime industrial purposes. Specifically, it demanded the continuation of shipbuilding or repair. If the purpose changed, the land legally reverted to the original Thorne Marine Trust. Marcus had sold the land to Harborview Development, which planned to immediately demolish the existing slips and build luxury condos, a clear textbook violation. I contacted the Federal Maritime Administration, FMA. They didn't care about my family drama or the stolen millions, but they cared deeply about upholding federal maritime covenants. The FMA immediately opened a quiet, deep-level investigation into the land use violation and its potential impact on local commerce. Next, the money and the crimes. Marlin Holdings in the Caymans was perfect for tax evasion, but disastrous for Marcus. I compiled a comprehensive dossier: the sales receipts, the lowball valuations, the wire transfers linking the property sale to Marlin Holdings, and the direct, undeniable connection between Marcus Thorne and the shell company. I sent the entire package, fully documented and legally watertight, to the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, and the FBI's white-collar crime division simultaneously. I had created the perfect legal storm of FMA violations, IRS tax fraud, and FBI wire fraud. I was no longer seeking revenge. I was simply reporting multiple federal crimes with indisputable proof. Marcus, meanwhile, was preparing his victory lap, completely unaware of the approaching thunder. He organized a massive, extravagant press conference at the site of the Old North Pier, the very place he had sold. He was announcing his new venture, a maritime consulting firm, funded entirely by the assets he'd stolen, dressed up as legitimate investment. He invited all the old clients, the local press, and every former Thorne Marine employee he had fired. He wanted to rub their faces in his ultimate, undeniable success. The date was set, 6 months to the day after he slid that fraudulent release form across the desk. The timing was crucial. I finally sent him the signed release exactly 3 days before his big event. It was a blank, meaningless signature, but it was the final assurance he needed. He truly believed he had won. The press conference was a spectacle of vanity. Marcus, tan and smug in a 5,000 Italian suit, stood at the podium with a massive backdrop showing a gleaming glass tower, the planned condos. He was delivering his self-aggrandizing speech, talking about progress, modernization, and moving beyond the outdated past. The old Thorne Marine was dead weight. He sneered into the microphone, his voice echoing over the harbor. "No, we have the vision for the future." Just as he finished the final dramatic flourish, two things happened simultaneously in a perfectly orchestrated cinematic climax. First, two unmarked black sedans, followed by two Federal Maritime Administration SUVs, pulled up, lights flashing silently. Second, a court process server, a tall, stern woman in a dark suit, moved purposefully toward the podium. She slapped a court order onto the glass podium top. The order was from the FMA, declaring the entire Harborview Development project null and void due to the violation of the 1923 Maritime Covenant. The land was frozen. Marcus's triumphant smile evaporated instantly. He grabbed the paper, his hands shaking so badly he nearly tore the document. The crowd began to murmur in stunned disbelief. Old retired employees started whispering, "The covenant, Richard's covenant." Then, two men in simple charcoal suits, but with the unmistakable, quiet authority of federal agents, moved in from the wings. "Marcus Thorne," the lead agent said, his voice quiet but carrying over the stunned silence of the loudspeakers. We have warrants for your arrest on suspicion of multiple counts of wire fraud and tax evasion related to Marlin Holdings, Ltd. Marcus looked like a mannequin whose strings had been abruptly cut. His face went pale, the veins in his neck bulging as his breath caught in his throat. He looked wildly, desperately for an escape, finally spotting me in the back of the crowd, just behind the news cameras. I didn't yell. I didn't cheer. I didn't say a single word. I just met his eyes and gave him the exact same cold, terrifying smile I had given him in his high-rise office months ago. He tried to turn and bolt, but the FBI agents were professionals. He was quickly cuffed, his expensive watch catching the sunlight, and led away, stumbling over his own hubris. The crowd of press and former employees erupted into a chaotic blend of shock and satisfying vengeance. The new glass tower on the backdrop seemed to mock the scene, a monument to a greed that had been publicly, utterly defeated. The aftermath was long, tedious, and immensely satisfying in its finality. Marcus's high-priced legal defense disintegrated quickly under the weight of the evidence. The dossier I had gathered was too meticulous, too clean, too legally sound to counter. He had stolen the money, but he hadn't covered his tracks from a forensic auditor who knew his family and his every personal habit. He pleaded guilty to several charges of wire fraud and tax evasion to reduce his sentence. He ultimately served 5 years in a medium-security federal prison. His wife divorced him immediately, taking his penthouse and the custom Porsche. The $70 million was largely seized by the government to pay penalties and restitution. I didn't recover the full amount directly, but the maritime covenant was my real long-term victory. With the land sale nullified by the FMA, the vast prime shipyard property, the true heart of our legacy, reverted back to the Thorne Marine Trust. The astronomical debt Marcus had accrued was declared his personal liability, not the trust's. I had the land, the respected name, and the moral high ground. Thorne Marine, the company Marcus declared dead weight, was reborn, but under a new, focused mission. I used the small settlement funds and the recovered property assets to start over, slowly and deliberately. Not building gigantic, high-risk yachts, but focusing on what my father truly loved: custom repairs, maintaining classic wooden ships, and teaching a new generation of artisans. I hired back every single employee Marcus had fired, starting with the old foreman, Hank. They were the true, irreplaceable legacy of Thorne Marine, not the cash flow. I found a quiet, profound peace I never had when I was chasing the high-pressure corporate ladder. I realized that my father didn't leave me a successful company. He left me a test of character. He left me a history of unwavering integrity and the tools, my legal mind, to defend that integrity. The betrayal hurt. It was the deepest wound I'd ever experienced, the loss of my father's brother and the cynical shattering of my planned future. But that cold wound forced me to stop grieving and start fighting, not for money, but for the truth of my family's name. I learned that true inheritance isn't measured by the millions in a bank account. It's measured by the strength of the foundation that remains after the vultures have tried to pick the bones clean. My foundation, my father's legacy of integrity, was solid. Marcus's foundation, built on lies and naked greed, crumbled completely under the first touch of the law. I drive past the shipyard every morning now. The air smells of salt, fresh, cut lumber, and clean varnish. It smells like home, finally. And now I know you can't steal a man's legacy when that legacy is written in the law.